Good evening, I'm Catherine Clavana. Welcome to Your Community, You're Connected, a live program about homeowner and condominium association issues. During the first half of our program, our guests will provide an overview of the Fair Housing Act and offer guidance on how to implement the laws in your community. The second half of our program will be the community open mic portion of the show, where you'll have the opportunity to ask questions on any topic related to common interest community living. Our panel of experts is here to answer your questions. You can phone in your questions to 703-818-1445 or email them to ycyc@fairfaxcounty.gov. In addition, you can now connect with us by tweeting or posting your questions on Facebook and Twitter using #BibleStudyClass. I feel like they're discriminating against me because of my religion. Do you have any advice? Michelle, what would you say to that?
Well, you know, from the association volunteer leader perspective, that community room probably would have some guidelines for usage. And it may not necessarily be with the purpose of why they want to use it, but am I a member in good standing? Do I pay the regular fee? Are there safety, are there uses that are prohibited due to safety concerns? You know, no flame blowing activity or something like that, you know, anything that could create an issue. My suggestion would be that this particular issue falls under the protected classes, so be careful about how you're responding with it because it's a religion. When we were having a conversation earlier, Terry made a good point that I hadn't thought about as far as, is the activity going to bring in more individuals into that space than the occupancy requirement allows? Is there a lot of activity? So those are things, when you think on the face of the use of the space, the occupancy requirements, and the
rental condominium, you have renter's insurance that dovetails with an owner's HO6 policy, where the master policy covers the structure, the exterior, almost always only the way the unit was originally constructed. So if you've got added carpet where there wasn't some, or upgraded some cabinets or something, that's things that become somewhat, to a certain extent, personal property, and you need your own insurance to take care of that. Master insurance almost never covers personal belongings, as in clothes and things. So it's very important that the occupant, whether it be an owner or a renter, make sure that they have their own insurance, because there are things that the master insurance simply won't cover, but their insurance would. Some of the things she's talking about would be covered under most renter policies and HO6 policies for an owner.
So she could have, for the owner. So the
owners have need insurance for the interior contents as well, because whether it's an owner or a renter in the unit, they need to have insurance of their own to cover their belongings and the betterments in the unit, because the association's insurance generally covers the structure, maybe the structure to the interior walls. After that, your furniture, your clothes, your shoes, things like that, they're your responsibility to insure.
So, but if the owner is renting out their unit and they have a policy, and you would assume that if there's some major damage, pipe burst, that it would have a component in it where it would cover some hotel stay, potentially, say it potentially has that. Would that cover the renter who was in there needing to?
Actually, in most cases, the owner's insurance is going to cover his loss of rent.
Right.
If the
loss of rent.
If the renter has to go live somewhere else, so that I know this is going to sound crazy, but the owner would get some reimbursement for his lost rent, while the renter is out taking advantage of their insurance to pay for their hotel expenses.
Right. Well, at least that's a good place to point this particular renter.
Insurance is the key.
It's a painful. It's a expensive lesson that a lot of owners receive. Because when they're out, you know, we've had hundreds and hundreds of frozen pipes this winter, displacing a lot of folks, and it's a splash of water, cold water in the face when they're told you're going to be out 3 weeks, a month and a half, while your units gets rebuilt, and the master policy doesn't cover it. Had you paid $200 per year for this individual policy, or if you're a renter and you pay for a different policy, I think it's technical HO7 versus an HO6 for the owner, you would have protected yourself, renter, piper. Unfortunately, that if you didn't have that coverage, you may get lucky and have some under the owner's coverage, but.
And it is incredibly inexpensive.
It is incredibly inexpensive. And it is unfortunate because unfortunately that's the only really response that you can give. Please make sure you get the insurance for the next time. But these losses is not the owner's responsibility for your personal belongings. And someone asked me a question about, well, I'm renting a room, I don't need renter's insurance. The renter's insurance is for your personal belongings. To cover you, and if you get pay the additional premium, it can help you for relocation expenses as well.
And liability too. If you fall asleep with a candle burning and you end up burning part of the building down and hurting somebody, that those individual policies will carry some level of liability protection. So if you get sued personally, and forget the insurance, forget that all coverage, but someone wants to take you to task for being negligent and causing them harm, that has liability protection, all those policies, another critical reason to get them.
And I just want to, and you might have said this, and I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this. This particular renter, would he legally be, if he's forced to leave the unit, would he have to pay rent to this landlord?
It's a fairly easy answer, and the expectation is yes. Most leases contain language that explain exactly that.
But it's interesting that the insurance policies are having the stipulation to cover landlords who've loss of rent,
income,
loss of income, and yet legally they're still bound by.
Well, you don't expect them to be double dipping, but if for some reason the renter does move out and the rent's not coming in, and it's going to be some time, the renter may have to find other permanent accommodations, then there's rent loss coverage usually for the owner.
Okay, I think we're going to try once more to talk to Leanne in Centerville. Leanne, are you there?
Hello, yes, I'm here. I was wondering.
Maybe not. Okay, we hope we get to talk to you, Leanne. Let's move on to, oh, is that you? No. Okay.
Hello? Hello?
Leanne.
Yes.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for hanging in.
Oh, thank you. I have a question about my HOA. We live in a townhouse community. We got a new president just a couple of years ago, and she's doing some things which seem a little weird. Last year, she was on everybody about having clover in the grass and insisting people take it out, even though I've heard it's beneficial. And she's also been writing different neighbors about things that are 10 to 14 years old in some cases. My neighbor next door, he's had a fence for 10 years. All of a sudden, they're on him about his fence. How old can they go on things? And what do you do when an HOA starts doing things that aren't the normal thing, like insisting on removing clover when it's never been a problem before? Or they start saying, okay, you had something from 6 years back, you have to fix it now, even though I haven't said anything before now.
Okay, well, let's ask our panel. What would you say?
Well, the first thing I'd be doing is looking at the association standards that are being cited, and if those standards exist that you can't have clover, and then the citation sort of looks legitimate, I agree. It sounds odd, but look at the association standards. Generally anything that's being enforced against you should be published somewhere, rather than this being the president's possible personal interpretation. But when it comes to fence repairs and so on, if your property doesn't look the way it should, you should repair it, whether somebody tells you to or not. But the association's position is it's responsible to tell you to fix it if you don't. So the fence doesn't look as questionable perhaps as the clover.
Yeah, I think the maintenance questions, I'm not as concerned from an enforcement standpoint about the maintenance. If a fence is falling into disrepair, or asphalt is needing, or paint is peeling, or shutters are hanging by a thread, or decks are falling apart, they're going to fall apart. And whether or not they should have acted 2 years ago, 3 years ago, or 10 years ago, it doesn't really, I don't think, impact the question. I think what she may be getting to, the clover sounds a little bit, like one of those areas where you've got to understand what those criteria are, and if there weren't any kind of standards for tall fescue and only tall fescue and not a single daisy, then so be it. But I think that standard, growing season after growing season, it's easy enough to eradicate. But what I hear she might be alluding to is, let's say it's split rail fence. Fence is otherwise fine, but all of a sudden we want to start saying you can't have split rail. We want board-on-board fences, right? We don't like shutters anymore. We had this in here and we didn't enforce it against this person 5 years ago. Those are the more difficult ones, and there's no hard and fast rule in Virginia as to how far you can go back or what your defense point is at which time they can no longer go back. We have resale certificates where, if the property's changed hand over that 10-year period and it wasn't cited, that's going to be a problem for the enforcer going backwards. And you also have just general issues where if that member or the board who was suddenly wanting to go gung-ho on some of these issues, I hope that they're talking to their management firms and calling and getting their county resources, talking to their council and saying, we want to clean up the community. We want to get some of these violations corrected. You look at them on a global standpoint and see whether or not these make sense, these don't, and then you can start being consistent and give people time to get things going. It sounds like this. Sometimes it's a knee jerk. You get a new regime that comes into power, and maybe they're elected on the guise of, the place is falling apart. Right. We need to get moving and cracking, and we're going to go gangbusters, and let's just send out letters. It's not the way we recommend doing it to get compliance, but
yeah, I usually recommend when I get these calls, it's okay to go back to the guidelines that had not been enforced, but the current board needs to give what we talk about proper notice and advance information. It may be that you need to republicize. These are the standards that that are part of our community. Next spring, maybe this is happening in November, and we're going to start doing inspections in April for compliance to these standards. We recognize that in the past this has not been done, but this board collectively has decided we would like to go back to those guidelines and bring our community back up to that. So it's about giving advance notice, and Pete mentioned the time to be able to comply. Many people don't pay attention to those guidelines until they get a violation. Most of them don't even know what they are. They just move in, they've got the document, the resale disclosure packet when they purchase, but they don't know the detail of it until they get a notice that they're in violation. But if it hasn't been done in several years, and now the board within the governing documents has the right to enforce it, but let's acknowledge the fact that it hasn't been done in the past and let people know it's going to be done in the future and give them time to comply and clarify what the standards are.
Oh, that's good advice. Yeah. We've had an email come in. Our bylaws say that owners in good standing can run for board office. What does that mean? How much leeway does a board have in excluding a candidate as, quote, not in good standing? How much leeway do owners have to insist that they be allowed to run? And that email's from Penny.
I would tell Penny that's usually defined in the governing documents. And a typical example of language is owners who are 60 days or more behind in their fees. That amount can vary, but that's common language in an HOA, for example. Owners who are 60 days or more behind aren't permitted to run in a lot of cases, aren't permitted to vote. Certainly at most annual meetings and at elections. They also may be subject to having other privileges revoked, but that's something that's pretty much going to be defined in either their adopted or recorded standards or in a published policy about how people become nominated for election. So it's not something they should have to guess at. It's something that should be in writing.
And membership is usually defined in communities as ownership. If I own my lot, I'm a member. So if it just has a general good standing type language, and you don't have anything defining it, because there's no help in the statutes really that define good standing. So you want to look at that as a board if you're thinking ahead, and define what it is. Even if you're making the decision, we think it's 60 days delinquency and you're not in violation of any rules, that's what we're going to define good standing at. Get that under get that codified in the association records, and then you can work forward. So you're not creating it the last minute. Someone says you're trying to exclude me, selectively. at this point in time, which is a valid concern. And we've got the Constitution of the U.S., which says you got to be 35 and born in this country to run for president. So.
All right. Well, we're just about out of time. Any final advice for volunteer leaders on fair housing laws, or anything else you'd like to?
I would just like to reinforce to take advantage of the resources that were shared. Those offices that were on the break advertised during the break are available just for questions. Even a board member or board that gets a request can contact the Fair Housing Office here in Fairfax County for some advice or some clarification or direction on what should we do to respond. So those resources are available out there to you. You don't have to do this in a vacuum.
I just heard that we have Ted holding to ask a question, so we're going to slip him in right before the end of the question, end of the program. Ted, go ahead.
Yes, hi. My
Are you
question
there?
for this evening is, and I actually serve on my association board, I've noticed there's a trend now
Maybe not.
where
We'll see.
associations are now
wait.
turning
Anything
to collection
else you'd like
agencies
to?
instead of using an attorney to collect.
I mean, I'm glad
delinquents.
you did this program. I think we could probably spend a couple hours doing it at
can.
least,
I think
because
so.
it's that critical, and we see it more often today than we ever have in the past. So we stay educated, boards, and rely upon your resources. There's a ton of stuff out there on the internet and that you can use to help educate how you respond to these kind of issues.
Terry, any management?
It's just really important when we work with our volunteers, rely on the resources available. We're generally making recommendations based on things that have happened to us before, and it's good to work on the reasonable aspect of everything. It's such a broad word, but it's the common thread. Everything needs to be reasonable, and that's what we sort of work on whenever we're faced with these decisions.
Any final?
Ted?
We've wrapped it up, I think.
I think so.
Well, thank you so much for being here and answering all our questions. Ted, I'm sorry we couldn't reach you. I think we've just about run out of time. Now, if you'd like to watch this program again, Your Community, You're Connected is replayed every Monday night at 8 p.m. right here on Channel 16. You can also watch the show online anytime. Go to the Channel 16 website at fairfaxcounty.gov/cable, select Channel 16 programs, and scroll down to Your Community, You're Connected. Be sure to tune in to Channel 16 on May 5th for our next exciting program. And I'd like to thank tonight's guests, Pete Philbin, Terry McGuire, and Michelle Thompson, for their expertise and knowledge. And to you, the viewing audience, thanks for watching and participating in Your Community, You're Connected. I'm Catherine Clavanna. Good night.